Hello, welcome back to the Eau Rouge podcast. And I need to actually welcome Chris back to the podcast today after his leave of absence. Welcome back, Chris. I'm glad to have you back. As great a job as Dan did, of course, it's always nice to have you back. So welcome to the French Grand Prix podcast.
Thank you. Hello again. Not as exciting as Baku, but it is nice to be home, as it were.
But as well, certainly this race was a lot more exciting than I think we thought it was going to be. Certainly strategically, it was fascinating, and we had no idea who was going to win the race until the last couple of laps, to be honest. I was back and forth the whole time. I was like, Verstappen's definitely got him here. No, wait, Hamilton actually might hold it off to the end. And then, of course, we got our answer with 1.5 laps to go. So the real race today was between the top four, between the two Mercedes and the two Red Bulls. So let's talk about what happened. I want to go through the race as chronologically as we possibly can. So right at the beginning, turn one, Verstappen seemed to have the perfect line. He got the corner and then he made a mistake and Hamilton took the lead. What went wrong there?
I feel that because he's so unused to being the favourite and leading the championship, Verstappen still hasn't got comfortable as the defender. He'd still rather be the man diving up the inside at turn one and pulling away from there. And I think not for the first time in the race, or not for the only time, should I say, we saw Verstappen struggle a little bit working out what he should do. Someone like Sebastian Vettel's a classic lights the flag leader, but it's pretty clear at this stage of his career, Max Verstappen is not.
And Mercedes, you would definitely say, we'll talk a little bit more about Max later on and his maybe lack of experience, but Mercedes definitely underestimated the undercut, didn't they? And that's really what cost them the race. Certainly it cost them the lead at the beginning of the race. And it was great work, I think, from Red Bull to actually get Max ahead. But I don't think they quite realized how strong the undercut would be.
No, it was a Merc strategic cock-up, which you feel of that sort you don't often see. Obviously, they'd have to bodge a good pit stop, don't they? But like, you don't tend to see them be the losing side. Not just the undercut the first time, but also the issues with not pitting a second time, particularly when they had Bottas in their ear telling them it was going to be a two-stopper and he needed to come in, which he did several times. And I don't know whether they were refusing to listen because it was Bottas or what, but it just seemed obvious to everyone that new tyres were needed. And by the time they made a decision, I think they just left it too late to do anything but keep him out.
It's really easy to talk about it in hindsight, but it seemed very obvious that both drivers were unhappy on the tyres and that they felt like they were going to go off. So, and like you said, it's unusual that Mercedes are on the wrong end of a strategy call like this. So you would think that Mercedes, with all of their experience in winning, would have thought about and made that call to come in for the second stop, even before Red Bull did, maybe, to give them an advantage. And Red Bull, I think then, as soon as they had that second stop, they had the upper hand because they forced Mercedes into a decision, either pit and react to Red Bull and hope that you come out in front, that, or the undercut doesn't cause too many problems and you don't lose too much of a gap to the leader, or stay out. And inevitably, of course, they chose to stay out, which I guess is the wrong decision, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. If they pulled him in around the same time as Verstappen, what would we have seen? Because Verstappen ultimately got by him on tyres rather than, raw racing pace. But it doesn't really matter, does it? What happened was a lap and a half from the end, Verstappen got round Hamilton and was absolutely away. And that was the end of that. Mercedes had done to them effectively what they did to Red Bull in Spain.
And I think also the best part about that Red Bull strategy, I think, because the pit stops, the first pit stop and as well the second one, they were punts, right? They were in effect Hail Marys, which could have come off or could not have come off. But what they did was they deliberately chose to keep Perez out for longer, to put him onto a one stop so that he would be brought it back into the race later on. And he passed Bottas and got that third place. And it's great for Red Bull to now actually use their second driver. And they actually maybe showed today that they have the ability to make a strategy call like that. I thought that was genius from Red Bull.
Yeah, and it was nice to see them using Checo for Checo's talents. After his tyre heroics at Imola, they used that as a strategy to help him get the most out of the car. And it was a second consecutive podium, a win last time out in Baku, a third place here. And he's really starting to look comfortable. And unlike, I think, Albon and Gasly, and to an extent, Ricciardo in his last season, Perez feels like part of the team. He feels like a Red Bull driver in the Red Bull family who's there to help Red Bull do well. And it's doing nothing but paying dividends for him, third in the championship. While it's still early days in the season, it's still fantastic to see that he's had really a more successful season than last season already, and he did pretty well last season overall.
But it's actually putting Red Bull in the championship fight as well. I think that's the key part, isn't it? Now they're picking up enough points to not just challenge on the drivers' front, but also in the constructors. So Max is leading the World Championship now. He's had some very good last couple of races. I know he retired in Baku, but it was still a very good race. But when he took the lead after that first pit stop, he seemed a bit surprised and a bit panicked about the fact that he was in the lead. He was he sounded panicky over the radio when he was talking to his team. It didn't matter in the end because he did hold Lewis off until they came in a second time, and then he passed Lewis on track to win the race. But was that a sign that maybe he is not 100% comfortable in that leading position at the moment, or am I just reading a little bit too much into that?
I don't know. I mean, Hamilton in his first couple of seasons was never particularly comfortable. He was much better, like Verstappen, putting on the pressure than he was soaking it up. Obviously, that flips around, and he became an incredible generational talent. But yeah, it's not an unfair observation, I think, that Verstappen, we've already discussed how Verstappen looked a bit nervous at the first corner. And I think, towards the end, it was really, I'm not sure he necessarily felt he was going to get round him. He really benefited from Lewis having a slither, didn't he? There was a moment where he made up a full second, which I think is ultimately what won him the race. And that was a Hamilton mistake, allowing Verstappen back in on old tyres, rather than the consummate assumption that Max Verstappen, had the ability to flawlessly get past Hamilton right at the death, which I think is something Hamilton knows he has inside. And when the shoe is on the other foot, executes. Now, does it matter? Because as we saw, it didn't stop Verstappen from getting a great result. Didn't stop him from putting off that overtake. But if it comes down to the wire later in the season, will that inexperience ultimately cost him? That's the real question, I think.
I think a lot of it depends on how many races he wins up until then. The more races he has like that, the more races where he's under pressure, because he was under pressure. He had to race really hard at the end of the race, and he still had to get past one of the greatest drivers of all time on old tires, but still, he still had to fight right to the end. The more races he has like that, and the more races he wins this season, and there are plenty of them to do it, then I think that the inexperience will become less and less of a factor. But he will, because he has to get over that hump at some point. Like you have to push past that and win that first world title. All F1 world champions have done that. The problem is he's coming up against somebody who has won more than anybody else, or probably will have maybe by the end of this season or next season. So that's going to certainly come into play as well. I think it's going to be so interesting to find out how many more races Max can win. And Hamilton, of course, he did drive like a champion for me. Again, watching him take that car, take those tires so far, when he was, so clear about the fact that these tires were not going to last to the end of the race, and he managed to get them. If the race was 2 laps shorter, he would have won the race. And I don't think there was any more he could have done, was there?
No, I think Hamilton did everything he could. Small mistake ultimately is what it came down to. But like, everyone's going to make mistakes, and on ancient tires on a high degradation track, it doesn't matter how good you are at keeping it off. You're going to eventually come into a position where if the other guy behind you is on tires that are 20 laps younger, it's going to be almost impossible to hold him off. I think that you have to honestly now question whether Mercedes and Hamilton are still the favourites for the title or not, or whether this third consecutive Red Bull win is the beginning of their sustained title challenge that will eventually lead them to success in the final year of the turbo hybrid era. It's been all Mercedes domination up till now, and this really is the first crack since 2014 in which it doesn't look like Mercedes are going to wipe the floor with everybody. And yeah, I think there's probably something to do with having 2 good drivers at Red Bull finally, as you say, like the ability to have multiple strategies finally, because there's a driver blocker there who is greater than or equal to Mercedes' second driver, even if there's almost nobody except Verstappen who can compete with Hamilton. But yeah, do we now think that Red Bull are more likely to win the title than Mercedes, or is that just a knee-jerk reaction based off 3 very good races, although one of them they should not have won?
Well, this was the big question that I wanted to ask you. Are Red Bull favourites for the title? And it is really easy to say, well, they're leading the championship. They've got the bit between their teeth. They've got the momentum now. They've got 2 drivers who are comfortable in the car and who can win races. Both of them have proved that. Mercedes have got one fantastic driver and another one who has not performed so far this season. There are what seems to be a kind of 50-50 split on which tracks suit which team as well. I mean, I was expecting Mercedes to do better in France, and I'm expecting them to sort of regain some of their strength over the next coming races throughout the sort of European stint. But it might not be that simple. I mean, when you look at Austria, for example, that we've got 2 races in next, very, very long straights, and traditionally we've seen the Red Bulls be very good in the twisty parts of racetracks. So we could see Mercedes coming back. But maybe, who knows, but I do feel like Red Bull have just got something at the moment that means that they have the momentum and they feel like they're going to be able to challenge. And then, of course, Austria is their home circuit. So I don't know how much of an advantage that actually gives you, but it's going to be, it's such a difficult question. Are Red Bull favourites for the title? And I think right now, there is a strong argument to say that they are.
Yeah. On current form, you have to fancy them. Whether or not it's because Mercedes are making stupid mistakes, strategic error here, Hamilton knocking a button and crashing off in Baku, it doesn't really matter. What matters is Red Bull very much have the bit between their teeth and are just charging forward at the moment. And it's strange to sit here and almost want to call Mercedes the underdogs, isn't it? But yet the temptation is very much there to sort of suggest now that it's Verstappen's title to lose.
But I don't think it's unfair either to to say that uh, the team that is favourite are the ones who are not making mistakes. They're the ones who are making the right calls. The teams that make the best calls are the ones that win the titles when there's such a tight challenge between two constructors. And that's what you've got at the moment. You've got Red Bull making all the right decisions, bringing their drivers into play where they need to, and you've got Mercedes who are, like I said, they're not performing at their best as a team. They're not performing at their best, let alone their drivers. And let's just touch on Bottas really quickly, because he was very angry that the team didn't listen to him about the fact that the tyres would not make it to the end of the race. And I certainly understand his frustration as well, but at the same time, where has he been for the last however many races? I suppose at least he was actually in the race today, which is a positive for him. Is that angry radio message to his team a real sign of the cracks that are forming between Mercedes and Bottas?
I think you'd be hard pushed to suggest it was anything but. You look at what was happening with Vettel at Ferrari towards the end. It feels very similar, doesn't it? It feels like a driver who feels he deserves better, getting frustrated and feeling left out in the cold. And I like whether or not there's any truth in the Russell 2022 rumors or not. It must be demoralizing to keep seeing your name in the papers as you are out, you are being replaced. Surely it's a foregone conclusion, but regardless of whether or not he is being replaced, you feel that synchronicity that was very much the trademark of Mercedes during this unprecedented title haul, really. What have they won? The last 7 titles on the trot. Even Schumacher and Ferrari didn't manage that. But you feel like that is missing, and perhaps that's what's causing the issues. Causing the silly mistakes, causing the problems. Maybe it's the team feels a little bit out of sync because they're finding themselves on the back foot. I don't think there were many outside Red Bull that would have anticipated that a third of the way into the season, Verstappen and Red Bull would be looking great. I certainly didn't. I had Hamilton down to walk it once again. But I don't know what to say about him. I hope he can bow out on his own terms, but it's looking more like his career is going the way of Imola, really. He's just going to get crashed into by George Russell and removed from contention, but this time on a sort of more permanent basis. Because where would you even go as Bottas if you left? Williams? I know
It's the only option, really. I mean,
start 4 years there, didn't it? The start of his career. It was a successful 4 years. Bottas is the greatest Williams driver of the modern era. Let's actually not forget that fact for a minute. He was really good for them. He had 6 podiums in his second season, came 4th in the drivers' title, driving a Williams.
Yeah,
fabulous.
I mean, he earned his Mercedes seat when he got it, didn't he?
Yes, yeah. He was he was the obvious man. You looked at the field when you found out Rosberg retired, and you said, "Well, it's going to be Bottas, isn't it?" And it was. But it's just, despite 2 second-place finishes in the last 2 years, you've never felt it worked out the way he would have liked it to work out. And I think this year, with the team facing a challenge for the first time, well, since they started winning, really, it's the wrong time to have a bad season, isn't it? And yet here he is having a bad season. And while he might feel hard done by, I have to point to another driver on the field who had his worst Grand Prix since, that he actually finished technically since China 2018, his 3rd ever race. It was a terrible race for Ferrari, but it was particularly poor for Charles Leclerc. Where was he? Why was he going into the pits that early on if you're on a 3-stopper, I think that makes perfect sense. You put him on gentle tyres, you send him out, he can just race as hard as he wants because you know he's got 2 more sets of tyres in the bank. If you're going to bring him in that early, like, do it for a reason. Don't just bring him in and then hang him out to dry late in the race and then finish up so far out of contention. It's embarrassing, which it absolutely was. You know, you got finished behind Giovinazzi and Russell and Tsunoda. Sainz didn't do much better in 11th, but at least, you know, like, he was almost in the points. Just lapped is not where a man who I think 2 races ago thought his career was getting back on track is looking to be.
Yeah, well, and this is one thing as well that we sort of forgot about because of the battle up front, was that there was races going on at the back of the field, but 5th place Norris finished almost a minute behind Bottas. You know, the gap was absolutely huge between those two. But like you said, Ferrari had an absolutely dreadful day. Leclerc's race was over, like, you know, right at the beginning of the race when they pitted him so soon. Like you said, it didn't make any sense whatsoever. At least give him a chance. You know, put him on a set of tires that are going to work for him. And yeah, Sainz ending up 11th. So no points for Ferrari, especially when it has seemed like they have been having a resurgence. We were talking about it in we were talking about it in the podcast. Yeah, Monaco podcast. We were saying that Ferrari were now back in the hunt for that 3rd place. And maybe it's just a blip. Teams get that, and we'll see them back up where they have been for the last couple of races when we go to Austria. But it was a little bit worrying and very strange, unexpected, you would say.
Yeah, it's just sort of poor, isn't it? It was much more like last year's Ferrari than this year's. Anonymous, only really there to sort of slip out of the points and look a bit weak. And yeah, I mean, 2nd place in Monaco feels like a long time ago after that. But on the whole, pretty solid point scoring finishes. It was Sainz's first non-point scoring finish this season. And yeah, you can forgive him a bad weekend. I think they weren't the only ones that suffered in France, were they?
And I think, to me, though, I think this is why McLaren are nailed on for 3rd, because they had a pretty average weekend as well. I mean, their qualifying wasn't great, and yet they still just quietly went about their business and got their drivers up to 5th and 6th place. And they have the ability to do that, whether it's the car, whether it's the strategy, whether it's the drivers, whatever it is that's causing it. When they have a dodgy qualifying, or when it looks like they're going to have a bad weekend, they just get on with the job. And they've got, like I said, Norris in 5th and Ricciardo in 6th. Now, you said to me that Ricciardo was actually your driver of the day at one point. You said that before the end of the race. Have you changed your mind, or are you going for Ricciardo for that?
I mean, maybe on the criteria on which I assessed Ricciardo, it would be Norris who had the better climb. I thought, in terms of Ricciardo, it was the first race weekend this year that I feel he's really shown some fight and some spirit. And he did, again, finish behind his teammate, but he did look a lot better. You know, he looked like somebody who on the right day would be there to take the serious points and snatch a podium. He looked like a man who's been putting in a lot of hard work and is paying off, which is nice to see. Because while perhaps he's not my favourite driver on the podium, he's absolutely doing better. And I don't think that it would be fair to look at Ricciardo and try and claim that it was all a fluke when it's quite clear his hard work and his desire to succeed is directly influencing how well he's doing. So not my driver of the day overall in the end, but I have to give credit where credit's due. He was definitely the stronger version of Ricciardo that we've seen this year.
And also comparing the McLarens with the Ferrari and then with the Aston Martins as well. So McLaren had a decent weekend, Ferrari had a terrible weekend, and Aston Martin, I would say, they had a good weekend on two fronts. One, obviously, the fact that they finished ahead of the Ferraris, and Stroll started 19th, which was actually last on the grid because Tsunoda started from the pit lane. So they finished both in the points, and with one driver starting at the back, and they made their tires last, and they worked their strategy well. It's something that they were trying to do with Stroll in Baku as well until his tire let go. But it shows again that maybe Aston's, when they get, if and when they get a weekend together, when the qualifying and the race actually comes together, they could be challenging for that top 6.
Their last 3 races have been markedly better than their first 4. Yeah, the 2-point scoring finishes at Monaco, that fabulous podium in Baku, and then once again 2-point scoring finishes in France. They're on overall form now, starting to look like they'll pull ahead of AlphaTauri probably by the time F1 gets to Britain. I don't see them now necessarily overhauling Ferrari, which I think I predicted they originally would before the season started. But they look like a team that's beginning to get through their teething problems, don't they? And a team that's beginning to present themselves as more like the Racing Point franchise that they took over than a new and slightly catastrophic venture into Formula One, which is, I think, in contrast to what's happening at Alpine, who are not doing so well overall, really.
They were non-existent. They were non-existent this weekend, weren't they?
Yeah, they were hoping for good stuff, weren't they? They gave it quite a big talk coming into the weekend, but have they pulled it off? No, they haven't. They're Alonso with a 6th place in Azerbaijan was creditable, but you just feel that they're going to be picking up the scraps from most of the season rather than really making the mark that they must have thought they were going to on the end of the strong finish with Ricciardo. 2 podiums from Ricciardo and a 2nd place from Ocon at the end of last season. I'm sure that everybody at Alpine is feeling like they can do better than this.
And maybe they should be. I think they've been my biggest disappointments as a team so far this year. I was hoping, like you said, off the back of last season, Renault and then into Alpine have always given this idea that they're a project, that they're building towards something, that they're moving forward, and each year is a new step. And then that looked very true when they signed Ricciardo. That was a coup when they got him from Red Bull. A driver who was winning races, to take him away and bring him to Renault to then build it up. And then it just felt like they just were always just kind of stumbling. They never quite got over the hurdles that they needed to. And then when things seemed to be coming together towards the end of last season, where they had a decent car, obviously they knew that Ricciardo was going, but then they were going to get a 2-time world champion in to replace him, even though we have agreed that he's way past it, but still. Yet it seems like they're stumbling again, and it's frustrating because they are just non-existent. They're just not on the radar. It's a kind of like you're watching parts of the race and you're like, oh, Alonso's in 8th, and then that's it. You carry, and it doesn't really matter.
There's no expectation, is there, that Alonso's going to do anything from that 8th place? It's just Alonso is in 8th. It's a bit like seeing an Alfa Romeo in 16th. It's just like your brain goes, oh yeah, Giovinazzi's 16th, and then on to the next thing. And it's quite a damning indictment, I think, really, of Alpine right there by comparing them to a man so, oh yeah, he's there in F1, that I couldn't find any highlight reels of him when I was trying to put the pre-season stuff together.
And I do just want to touch on Pierre Gasly again, because he's been one of my drivers of the season this year. I've said it in a few podcasts. I think I love how he's proving that he's a good driver. Another solid points finish. And also Tsunoda as well. Tsunoda, after qualifying, when you cause a red flag after a minute of the qualifying session in France, the track that has almost more runoff area than an airport runway, has managed to cause that red flag. He really, really needed a clean race. And he got one, thankfully. You know, he came, I think it was 13th in the end, and he started from the pit lane. So promising signs. But Tsunoda's going to have races at weekends like this more often than other drivers, isn't he? Simply because of his, like you mentioned right at the start of the season, his lack of experience in European tracks. He's the youngest driver on the grid. He's going to have more weekends like this, isn't he? I hope AlphaTauri stick with him for next season.
I think they will, because he is getting better. You know, he had a wild time at the start, but he's had 2 point scoring finishes in his first 7 races. And, you know, he's getting better. You feel he would have finished in the points in France if he hadn't had to start from the pit lane, slightly hairy qualifying or not. And he's beginning to do what he needs to do now, isn't he? Keep his nose clean, starting to go fast and not make stupid mistakes, which I feel you can't say of all the rookies this season, because I think both Haas drivers are much more error prone than Tsunoda at the moment. It's just Tsunoda seems to be developing as a bit of a character in a way that the other two at Haas are not.
I think it's because he's so hot and cold, isn't it? It's like he'll be smashing it one weekend and he's, really high in the points, and the next weekend he's flinging it into all, every 3 laps. So whereas the Hasses are consistently poor. So I think that's why. It's because we expect maybe a bit more from Tsunoda, A, because he's in a better car, but B, because we know he's got it in him, and then he makes these seemingly quite, rookie errors.
Yeah, it's just, I think he'll get there. He'll have the season and some of next season. And if he doesn't look like he's delivering, will we see someone like Liam Lawson appear halfway through 2022? Maybe. But yeah, it's a bit early with him, I think, to really say what's going to happen. But credit where credit's due. He's had a couple of decent races now. And if he can continue this upward trajectory, he'll be doing fine. He's actually doing no worse than Kvyat last season. And Kvyat had quite extensive Formula One experience. At teams like actual Red Bull. But yeah, we'll see. Give him another 5 races, and I think we can judge where Tsunoda will be at for the season. But so far, so good when he's having a good weekend. And oh God, what a car crash, literally, when he isn't.
Yeah. I think when you take a punt on a driver that young and inexperienced, you've got to give them a chance. You've got to stick with them, which is something I've not been very happy with about Red Bull, especially over the last few years. And final point, I suppose, on George Russell. I know this is maybe a little bit of a very, very small point to finish off, but he is just edging closer to those points. I think 12th this weekend is a very, very solid finish. And sorry, I think he finished 13th actually rather than 12th. Oh no, it was 12th. Yeah, he finished 12th. And Latifi as well finished 18th, so standard, but looked a bit closer in qualifying. So improvement for George Russell.
Yeah, he's pushed Williams back to 9th in the constructors, so there is that. He'll get there. I feel like he knows he's going to Mercedes, doesn't he? I feel like he's just really polishing that racecraft, and actually having someone in Mercedes who's got experience of dealing with a crowd of traffic is probably quite invaluable, because it appears to be something they're struggling with at the moment. So if he takes the rest of the year to polish his racecraft, those points will come, and he'll be set up beautifully for whatever happens next year.
Well, that's it. That is the French Grand Prix done and dusted and spoken about. It was actually a far better Grand Prix than I think a lot of us were expecting, which was great. So please give us a like and subscribe. We would love to hear more about what you think about that race in particular and the season so far, because I would certainly say it's been the best season that we've seen for a long time. Next up, we are in Austria at the end of the month. In fact, it's this weekend coming up. I think we've got a triple header this week or these last 3 weeks. So please do join us again next week. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you then.